Adoption and expensive. Two words that do not always belong together. There are 120,000 children in the United States that are waiting for a forever family, and adopting through this option is extremely affordable. I'm Marcy Bursack, an adoptive mom of a sibling pair, and also the author of The Forgotten Adoption Option. Twice monthly, I will interview people like adoptive parents and adopted children who have been touched by foster care adoption. My goal is to find more forever families and increase awareness about foster care adoption, because if it were you or me, we would want someone to do this for us. Welcome to the Forgotten Adoption Option podcast. In this episode, I'm interviewing a couple who adopted a daughter and then had a biological son, and they are actually having a second biological son here in a few months. Hi, Travis and Anna.
Hello.
Hello.
This is so fun. I met Travis and Anna through a young adults group at church in the St. Louis area. They had lived nearby, and they used to come over and play board games, but then they moved out of state, which was sad. And I'm pretty sure Anna and we used to be allies in this game called King of Tokyo, like you wanted to be on the top of the mountain kind of thing. And we played it one Halloween night during a group game night. But back then, none of us were parents. And as we were talking kind of off the show recording, Travis mentioned we really haven't seen each other in like 7 years, which feels like such a small but long amount of time.
That is true. It's weird with social media. You're able to kind of keep up with people without actually talking to them. So I feel like I know about your life, but I don't think we've really sat down and spoken. And yeah, we've been here for over 7 years now. So
Which is crazy.
So
pretty crazy.
It is. Well, but you guys were also helpful with my book, The Forgotten Adoption Option. I was reaching out, trying to find other families that adopted age groups that I didn't. And so you guys helped in that way too. So we've kind of interfaced. We just haven't like caught up. So you're absolutely right.
Right. Yeah. It's a lot harder to do game nights now with the children.
Yes.
That is true. Unless we do it like, we should try that though. We could do it like after they go to bed. We could do it on Zoom because they have some good virtual. So maybe that's in our future. Maybe this will happen.
Yes.
Let's do it. Make it happen.
I love that. So we share adoption in common as families, which is really cool. But which of the two of you brought up the desire to adopt first?
I would have to say it was probably me, because I, want to take in, everybody and help and do what we can. And so you and Nathan actually exposed us to the idea. I'd always liked the idea of adoption, but didn't really know about the different ways to go about it. So you guys planted that seed, and then we, moved to Michigan, and God brought us to an amazing church that is very fortunate to have a very strong, not only foster care, but foster care adoption background. And so from there, the seed just kind of grew. And then we found out unexpectedly that I was expecting in 2015 and, experienced our first miscarriage. And God used that just to open both of our hearts to say, God, what do you have next for us? And I remember Travis and I were reading separately, but at the same time, the book, You and Me Forever by Francis Chan. And we just kind of looked at each other and we're like, we're supposed to move forward with adoption. So thankfully, we had people who went through that process. And so it seemed doable. And that was the first step to, meeting our Millie.
Holy cow. So tell us a little bit, Anna, about this book, You and Me Forever. Like, for people that might not be familiar with it, what's it about? Is it for adults? Would you recommend it?
Yes, I'd recommend it. Travis probably is probably more articulate with that. So, I'll let him talk about it.
We were doing this at, we had like a young married couples group at our current church. And it was a book that we were reading it's really a marriage book, but it's not a typical marriage book in terms of like, here's how to have a flowery and beautiful relationship. It's more about like, do what you're supposed to do, and marriage, is a mission. You have a mission to fulfill in your marriage. And there was just one line in there where he was discussing. He brought up foster care a few times in the book, it's not about foster care at all, but the author brings it up a few times, and he was discussing how, you know, as people, we tend to like wait until we feel like a sense of readiness or calling, you know, for those that are Christians, is like a Christian word we use for, you know, in towards something. And there was just a simple line where he's like, why don't we just like when there's good things that need to be done, why don't we just err on the side of I'm supposed to do this, unless there's like we hear, you know, feel like we're not supposed to. And that was kind of another step forward for Anna and I to be like, yeah, why wouldn't we just jump in and start foster parenting? So,
which is wild because it sounds so logical, right? Like we'll just do the
Right.
thing that seems right, but we have
Right.
fears and we have, you know, concerns, and that can stop us, which is so fascinating. And I appreciate that you share that, because that really might help some folks that are listening go, oh, I'm going to pick up that book and kind of do my own kind of heart journey in that space as well. And you all mentioned, Anna mentioned that because seeing my husband and me adopt through the foster care system, it kind of turned you on, and this book as well, to the foster care adoption space. But were you aware of infant and international adoption, and how did you kind of land that you wanted to go down the foster care adoption path?
Definitely, definitely our relationship with you guys is what like really steered us into foster care adoption. I mean, obviously I was aware that adoption existed, but for me, I would say I didn't really know any, you know, practical information about adoption. I just, you know, people get adopted somehow, but I don't, you know, I didn't know how. And when we, you know, began having a friendship with you guys and hanging out all the time, and you guys were just so passionate about foster care adoption, that's really what exposed us to that idea, you know. And then we started, you know, doing research and stuff like that too. But
it was almost like a light bulb for me, because I'd always been attracted to the idea of adoption, but I am a person that has never really been like called to do things internationally. Like I don't feel this big sense that I need to go overseas, you know, to do missions work, or I just feel like I'm called to like our neighborhood, the people we interact with on a daily basis. And so seeing you guys take that path, and then seeing, you know, families around us here in Michigan who've done that, it just clicked. Like, what better way to be part of your community and to help those literally that you like are in contact with every day than getting involved through your local foster care system. So it just kind of clicked for me personally.
Yeah. And I wonder if you all, because some of my listeners are people that they themselves have already adopted through foster care. And some of them have explained to me, like, hey, Marcy, I've never really known how to talk to my friends about this or how to tell people. Just kind of from what you saw through the life of my husband and me, like, what were things that you were able to do with us or see? And how would you encourage people that are like, well, I didn't know how to tell my friends, but man, I could do that easy thing to like give them a glimpse of this and to tell them, you know, that they could also do this.
I think, you know, a big thing obviously is just, you know, sharing your story. You know, part of being in community with people is just sharing life together. And, you know, just like for us, hanging out with you guys was kind of the first time we were ever exposed to the idea of adoption through foster care. And then likewise, we have had a lot of conversations with our friends, you know, and people in our church and whatever here that, you know, that they have seen our story, and, you know, will meet with us for lunch or coffee or whatever. And like, hey, we're thinking about, you know, foster care because we saw you guys do it. Like, how does that work? How did you get into it? What do you know, what does that look like? What's the adoption process like and stuff? So for me, it's just sharing your story, you know, and being willing to be in community with people and let people into your life, you know, into your home or around, you know, a table drinking coffee or whatever.
And then just being transparent and real. So not sharing just, you know, oh, these are the great things that are happening or have happened. But excuse me, walking them through the good and the bad, letting them know like this is a decision that, I mean, you're gonna live life with. And so letting them feel the transparency of what you've gone through, knowing that if they decided to do this, they're not alone. I always tell people, like, like, nothing you say, nothing you ask me is going to shock me. Like, I'm not easy to offend. Like, I've probably felt it all. So just creating that space for them to say all the things that people are afraid to ask, like, well, am I going to love this child if it's not mine? Or what if I don't like them every day? All those uncomfortable emotions that come because we're human.
Or what if I fall in love with a child and they get, put back with their family or whatever,
Right.
reunited.
Mm-hmm.
So
just creating kind of an open space for us has always worked well, and just having the conversation with people.
Yeah. I like what you shared about just, excuse me, being like creating that space of safety. Like it's okay to ask, and it's okay to ask anything, like, and sometimes I think, I know our journeys might have been different in some ways, but sometimes people mean well and it doesn't come out right. And so I love that you're like, if you just present it in a way that it's okay to just say it the way it comes out, and it's okay because we understand you're trying to learn. I think that's a really accepting way to help people get more information, because there are a lot of misconceptions or things that we just don't know. And so it's great when people want to get answers to those things. So can
right,
you all
especially well, sorry, I was
go
just gonna
ahead?
say,
No, go ahead,
especially
Travis.
with the way our society is now, too, just like we're just so offended all the time, and it breeds an environment where people are afraid to ask questions and try to learn because they don't want to offend and so people are like, well, I don't know how to say it or how to talk about it, and so just letting people know, like, hey, I've nothing you can say is going to offend me. Just speak openly and ask your questions. We're here for you. I think is a big help.
Yeah, it sure sounds like that's a comfortable way to help people feel like they can be at ease and ask anything. So you all adopted one. So how old was she when you met? How old is she now?
Well, our story is a little unique. So we technically met Millie, or knew about Millie, when she was still in utero. So when her biological mom was still pregnant with her. So we started the first step of the process, which was to go to the orientation classes. And by some mix up, there was a couple in there with their grandparent, and the grandparent was trying to get certified or licensed, and the couple said that they were there to support their grandfather. And so as the class wore on, it came out that it was their children who had been removed in the system. And so we were in this room with this couple and their grandfather for like 3.5 hours. And two sides to every story. So they were sharing their story, and the more they talked, I sent Travis a text message, even though he's sitting right next to me. I was like, I think these kids they're talking about are with one of our friends. I think that she is their foster mom. And so knowing that background and listening to them speak, it actually was a traumatic first interaction for us, because we got to sit through all of the raw emotions of the parents, which, I mean, everyone who's involved in foster care knows that, I mean, it's not a good situation for anybody. It's painful for the parents, and it's painful for the kids, painful for the foster parents. So it took us a few weeks to kind of heal and be like, God, like, are you sure we can do this? Are we're strong enough to do this? And then God lit a fire in Travis and I to just start advocating for that child, whether at that time it was just praying. We didn't know anything about, who she would turn out to be. Was it a boy or girl? Any of the background. We just knew that even if it was just to pray, that child needed to be, part of our lives in that aspect. And then, who was one of our best friends now, like I said, has her two older siblings, ended up adopting them through foster care as well. We told her that, the bio mom was pregnant again, and she is single and was like, oh, I don't know that I can do 3 under 3 because, the 3 are very close in age. And so God put it on our hearts that, hey, you need to be open to this situation if it comes up. So I feel like we met our daughter when she was still in utero. She didn't officially come into care until she was 3 months old. And then she was with our good friend for 3 months while our license finished. Like, we finished doing everything we needed to. And she's been in our home full time since she was 6 months old. And now she's a very sassy, almost 6-year-old.
So how long did it take you all then? So she moves in at 6 months. When did you all get to go to court? How old was she when you finalized the adoption?
Just after a year. So our process with her went very quickly, because there was no rights were terminated immediately. So that, and then there was nobody was contesting the adoption, no family members, nothing.
But that's highly unusual. So our daughter's story is in some sense a little more traumatic than her older 2 siblings. She was very severely neglected, and because of the condition she was in, rights were automatically terminated pretty much on all 3 siblings. And her older sister had been in care on and off for 2.5 years. So our friend, her finalized adoption hearing wasn't until almost like a year and a half after ours, because they contested the older 2's adoption. So our experience is very unique. We always, tell parents that.
Yeah, we always make sure people know, like, don't expect your story to look like ours, because it was just amazing how everything fell together, even in terms of just with the foster care agency. Like, we were able to talk with them even before our daughter was born, really, and before we even had our license. And they were like, yeah, essentially, like, we're going to place her with you. You guys will be able to have the opportunity to adopt, because what was cool about this situation, as Anna mentioned, our friend is single, and it would have been 3 under 3, if not even younger, and there's special needs involved and stuff. So it would just been a lot for a single mother, and we, were able to be like, hey, we can do this together, and so our kids are raised. They know that their brother and sister, her kids call, us uncle and aunt, and our daughter calls her aunt. But the kids know that they're brother and sister, which, is a beautiful mess that we'll explain to them sometime when they're older. But
and we do holidays and birthdays together.
Yeah, so they get to be raised together as siblings, which is awesome.
So we always tell everyone that we, rode in on our friends' coattails, that most of the time the process is a lot longer than what we went through. So
what an incredible story. But yeah, I want to definitely point out, because I do get asked a lot. People are like, you didn't write in your book that I can adopt a baby. And I'm like, because you can't. And you guys are a living proof of that. Like, you're a very
we are the exception to the rule.
You are the exception. It is possible. So if someone's listening, like, well, Marcy, someone did. I'm like, they did. They absolutely did. It is also, there's a couple things I want to point out for people that might not be as familiar with foster care adoption. It's common if a family has multiple children over time, that what Anna and Travis have shared, that if a few are already in care, then the next or any that come after that often go into care as well. And care just means they're going into foster care. So I just want to point out all the parts that were very unique, because you're right. Like, you guys got to meet the bio family in advance. You kind of were already preparing your hearts for it well before you were licensed. And so a lot of that makes your story just, very special, but definitely not the norm.
It is unique. Yes. And let me just say, we didn't get to meet the bio parents in advance. I'm not going to go into detail, but it was not a good meeting. It was a very bad situation. I came home, I left that orientation class and said, I'm never going back. We're not going to do this. But of course my heart changed, but it was, they were never supposed to be in that class. And the things that they were saying were awful and had deterred me from ever wanting to go back. I'm like, if this is what the system's going to be like, I don't want to do it. And I'd also add, our story with our daughter was unique, and it still wasn't easy, but it was easier than normal. But we also have had the experience of, we fostered other children and had we also had another baby boy that we were placed with that they told us rights would be terminated and, all this stuff, and there wouldn't be any visits or anything. And that turned out to just be totally not the case. And it drug out, into a crazy situation. And we, and he was ultimately reunited, which is good. But we've experienced the other side of that too, and kind of the heartbreak side of it not working out. So
you heard some heavy things from the bio family, which sounds hard to digest, not knowing.
It was intense.
Okay, intense is your word choice. And then at the same time, you still went back. And I think the key takeaway from what you just shared, Travis, is that, because even with my kids, it was like, oh, they're going to be with you for like 4 months, then rights are going to be terminated. They'll live with you 2 more months, go to court. And like 18 months later, it's still a roller coaster and nobody knows.
Yep.
And so you really, this is, I think what's different, I know in the infant and international adoption space, sometimes you're like matched with a kid and then something falls through. But in the foster care adoption space, the timelines are kind of in air quotes always, and the outcome is in air quotes always. And so there is a flexibility needed. So I appreciate that you all pointed that out. So how did you know where to get started to pursue foster care adoption? Because I know that I hear from people, they're like, okay, I get that there's a need. How do I get going? But you all had moved out of state. So even that like convolutes it. So how did you figure out what agency to go through and how to get trained?
So I talked to everybody, in our circle that had been through the process. And then one piece of information, one group that was vital to me is I got on Facebook, and there was just a Michigan foster adopt community. And so even just reading, not necessarily even having to participate, but just reading other people's experiences, you learn questions to ask and places to go. So just, talking to the people who've been down that road before, and then doing research just even in the Facebook community gave me questions to ask and a little more knowledge of where to go. And then from there, it just start checking things off the list that they ask for.
Kind of figured out the process. So how did you guys grow as individuals or even as a couple by becoming parents? Can you all share some examples of how this kind of changed and helped you grow maybe together or just learn new skills?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, so we had never been parents before foster. And so, that was, it's funny because when you go through the licensing process, you have to fill out just an unbelievable amount of paperwork. And, how would you handle discipline? How would you handle this? How would you do that? How do you do this? How do you do that? And, so we're just like theorizing about, what our parenting style will be. But you learn very quickly that that the best laid plans, don't always work when you have a real life child, tearing things up and sassing you and everything else. But no, one thing for me, I will say is, as much as I hate to admit it, I would say I had a little bit of that, kind of arrogance sometimes when you would be in a restaurant or something or at a grocery store and see a kid going crazy and you're like, why can't these parents just control that kid? And it would never be like that in my family.
Never.
And yeah, and going through obviously becoming a parent, but even just going through the foster care process and stuff opened my understanding so much more to, different kinds of special needs and reactive attachment disorder and sensory processing disorder and, all of these things. And I learned very quickly, like, there's just no room for arrogance or judgment in parenting because everybody's just trying to do the best they can for the most part. And you really have no idea, what kind of stories there might be behind the surface, if any child, but, foster care especially, because of course, if a kid is in care, they're probably not coming from a great situation. And that leads more to the idea that there might be some trauma or abuse or special needs or something like that. And so that just opened my eyes so much to like these kids have, just so many things that they've been through at such a young age that just looking from the outside in, you would never dream about. So just give everybody a little bit of grace, we're all doing the best we can. But.
So good. Sounds like it softened your understanding of how to be kind to yourself, but how to also be kind to other parents.
for sure.
Yep. And one thing that I continuously learn is almost how, and the best way to word it, hopefully, would be like to fall in love with my daughter for who she is over and over again. Because as time has progressed, quite a few needs have developed from, trauma that she went through. And so on the days that are frustrating, because we're all people trying to, just live life, seeing her for who she is as a person and the behaviors for what they are, which is a symptom of something that it's not her, like almost seeing through the struggles and remembering who she was created to be, and this beautiful little person who is also just doing the best she can to try and figure out her own mind and body. So just getting through the diagnosis or the labels or the behavior at the moment, and just truly like remembering who she is as a person, and just seeing that through the frustrations, and going like, and then looking back at, the foster sons we've had, same thing, looking at them through the lens of who they are, not what they've been through, and just loving them where they're at and helping them figure it out. Because I think it's easy as an adult and you're just doing life to be like, well, why aren't you just doing this? Just do this. And realizing it's so much more for them, and remembering to love them as a person and to look past the different situational things going on.
That's great advice. And that's, yeah, I appreciate you both sharing kind of things you've taken away from this particular experience. And I'm curious too, so because you have an adopted daughter, you have almost 2 biological sons, I've had some people ask me, well, how do you know that you can love an adopted child the same as a biological child? And since you kind of tasted parenting from both of those situations, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, that's one of those questions that nobody wants to ask or admit to, I feel like, but there's a certain amount of shame, I think, around asking that question, but that is a very real question that I struggled with. And even as we were kind of tiptoeing into getting our foster license and stuff, I was talking with people and somebody would say, "Oh, so are you ever going to try to adopt through foster care?" And I was kind of the one saying, I don't know. I really wanted to have biological children first and then adopt. We wanted to adopt, but I wanted to have biological children first. And I kept saying that. And I was speaking to a friend who has an adopted son, and he kind of challenged me on that after like 2 or 3 times of me saying I wanted to have biological children first. And he was like, why? Like, why would that matter? Like, why does it change? And this is your son or your daughter. Like, why does it matter if they're biological first or adopted first or never biological or whatever? And the more I thought about that, I realized, yeah, I guess that doesn't really make sense. And so I think the truth is, I guess nobody's really going to be able to 100% settle that question until they just do it. But I mean, the thing is that, like, if you are going to adopt a child, that you're gonna love that child. That is your child. Like, I mean, I can't imagine my life without my daughter. She is my daughter. Like, I love that little girl. She delights my heart like nothing I could ever imagine. I mean, just at all times of the day, I can watch her and the way she interacts and the way she loves and the things she says, and she just will light up my face with a smile. And there's almost like a certain different element of fierceness to my love for her versus my biological son, just because of I know what she's been through and how hard we had to fight for her and advocate for her, and we still are, because she's developing all these special needs and stuff. So yeah, it's a very real fear, but you realize very quickly that you didn't need to spend so much time on that fear. Later, I'll tell you a funny story. I took my daughter to a doctor's appointment one day, and like a routine checkup, and the doctor was kind of going through things. Okay, we have this, we have this, we have this, and she goes, and obviously we're not going to be able to get a blood sample from mom or dad. And I was like, why? I'm right here. I can give a blood sample. And the doctor just looked at me for like a solid, 5 seconds that felt like 30 seconds. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I get it. I understand. So like, I just forget that she's adopted a lot of the time.
And to clarify, when we talk about fighting for her, it wasn't like fighting to keep her or to, keep her away from her biological parents. It was just advocating for needs that she would have and advocating to get her the help that she would need. Because foster care, I think it gets forgotten about that it's, meant to be a cooperative system too. And so, but then it is, like Travis said, just this fierceness. Like, I have a whole new level of mama bear that comes out for our daughter that does not come out for our son. Like, it's, I love them both equally, would do anything for them, but she's just, it's another level because of what she's been through, what we've been through with her, and it's just, she's our daughter.
Yeah. And I'll say, I know this is too long of an answer, but just to add
It's not,
one more
you're
thing,
fine.
because of, this is something that I counsel people about when it comes to marriage as well. And I think it applies here is like in American culture, especially, we're raised with this idea that love is an emotion that happens to us, that we fall in love and we have this infatuated state. But if that goes away, then we've fallen out of love. And I, when I'm talking to couples who are about to get married, I'm constantly reminding them, you need to remember that love is a choice. It's not something that happens to you. Like, yes, infatuation happens to you, but when you're talking about forever, you're choosing to love every single day. It's a commitment that's deeper than just a temporary feeling. I think that applies to adoption as well. You have chosen to love and care for that child for the rest of their life. And there's nothing that interferes with that. And when your biological kids come along, or if, it's just adding to the family, just like anything else. Like, there's no favoritism or anything like that. So
I love how you answered that question, because it does come up. It does. People think it. I've been asked it because I don't have biological children, so I don't know what it's like on both sides of that. But I think we both shared some great examples of how you are fierce and you love your kids and you meet them where they are. And those are the beautiful answers. So as we wrap up, one thing you both mentioned is, because you've gone down this path of adopting through foster care, people know that about you and then they approach you and ask you questions. So I'm curious if you could share what are a few of those questions people ask you about how to do this, or how your experience was, and how do you answer those questions?
One I get a lot is, well, how do you know you're ready, or how do you know you can do it? And my advice is to, you don't. With most things, like, you don't know. If there's not just going to be, you're going to wake up one day and there's just this light bulb, okay, you're ready to do foster care. So I always tell people to start the process, because it's a long process. And at least here in Michigan, like, you can go through the entire process and still never say yes when they call and say, I have a possible placement, and they tell you a little bit about the child. And that's when you'd say yes or no. Like, yes, I'll take this child into my home. Up until then, it's just preparing yourself. So, like the situation we are in, I wish we would have started months before, so our daughter could have just come straight into our home. So I always say, take the steps. You can always stop the steps at any time, but you've at least started them, so you have the option to say yes, versus if you wait and there's never going to be the option to say yes because you haven't done the legwork. So that's my advice that I always give, is just get started. You control, if you continue, and then you control, the child you take into your home as well. So then at least you'll have the option to say yes.
yeah. And I one of the things that I admire about Anna is she's like a bureaucracy ninja. She can navigate bureaucracy like nobody I've ever met, and that is a key skill if you're going to be a foster parent, and especially if you're going to try to go on to adopt. because, you know, everybody hears the phrase, the system is broken and whatever, and maybe it is or isn't. We don't have to talk about that now, but there's definitely difficulties. And depending on who your worker is, like determines a lot of your fate in terms of your timelines and things like that. And Anna was like a ninja at, you know, well, finding out who somebody's boss is and copying them on an email or, you know, finding the right people to talk to and doing it in a way that people still loved her and she was endearing to them. And that is a hard skill to master. So if you can do that, that's a big one. But my friends who haven't fostered or adopted, one of the things they ask me a lot, because our family is currently experiencing uh, I wouldn't call it hardship, but difficulty, because when we adopted Millie, she was so young and she had no apparent delays or special needs or medical issues or anything cause any concern for anyone. So we did not, you know, receive any kind of medical subsidy, and I don't know if you'll need to explain what
You
that
can
is.
go ahead, Travis. Tell people what a
Okay.
medical subsidy is.
Yeah, so when you adopt a child through foster care, if they have known medical issues or developmental delays or special needs of some kind, you can apply for and be granted medical subsidy from the state, which basically means that even though you're adopting them, the state will subsidize their medical care to varying degrees. So, in my circle of friends, we have another couple who has adopted through foster care. Their kids had, well, one of their children had very extreme special needs before they adopted. And so they received, you know, like 100%, he's covered for all of his surgeries and everything, all of his therapies, everything he needs. And because they adopted a sibling set and the sibling was older, uh, she actually is covered too. I don't exactly know how their, you know, I can't speak to how their situation worked, but that's what the outcome was for them. So currently, we're finding and discovering over the last year or two that our daughter does have a lot of developmental delays and does have a lot of special needs, and that nobody knew about, but it's from past trauma and things that are coming to the surface. And so we found out, you know, she's been diagnosed with ADHD and sensory processing disorder and a form of cerebral palsy, and has, you know, gross motor skills delays and fine motor skill delays, and, you know, just a lot of things. And so she needs a lot of therapy, and there's all these different tests and things that need to happen. And we're basically out of pocket for that, you know, whatever our insurance will cover, but insurance doesn't cover a lot of those things. So our other friends will ask me a lot, well, how come their stuff is all covered and yours isn't? You know, and trying to explain that, well, at the time that we adopted, medical subsidy wasn't an option. And yes, you can apply for a post adoption subsidy, but it is a difficult process. And working through all of that paperwork and getting the right kind of diagnoses and the right paperwork from the doctors and all of that stuff to be able to reapply for subsidy. And then even if we did get granted, it wouldn't be to that full extent, you know. So explaining that process to people is something that people ask a lot. And I feel like when people ask a lot about like how does visitation work and stuff like that too, which is a whole can of worms. And but you know, explaining that to people is, you know, if you've been through foster care and had to do visits, you know that it can be interesting. So those are some of the things.
And then I always direct them to the Facebook groups, because where I learned a lot about the things that Travis mentioned is through just reading other people's experiences. So again, you don't have to be a participant, you can just be an observer and still learn a lot of the right questions to ask to advocate for the child that's in your care that you're going to adopt, and then just yourself as a family too, because there's resources, you just have to know how to ask for them.
That's good. That's so good. Okay, Travis, because you get a cliffhanger, the poor listeners are like, wait a minute, visitation. So just to clarify what Travis was sharing really out of the lens of foster care. In foster care, yes, children usually they have visitation with biological family members, and that's a whole other can of worms, which you can go Google and go read. But when a child is adopted through foster care and the adoption is finalized, which means the adoptive family's gone to court, and the child is now legally part of the family, their adoptive family, every state is different in how they handle it. I know Missouri, we're a closed adoption state. So as an adoptive parent, I got to choose if I wanted to maintain contact. How is, if I wanted to maintain contact, what is Michigan like? Did you guys get to pick?
Once the adoption was final, we had to say if we wanted the agency to share our information with the biological family.
So you have
it sounds like it's the same. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we chose not to do that, especially because we knew that it was a bad, situation. So.
Understood. Yeah, we also made the same choice, different reasons, but yeah, we had some instability that we didn't really want to bring into the drama. So just so listeners have some closure, if your child is adopted through foster care, those visitations are not part of that.
Right. Don't be afraid of that from adoption. Once the adoption happens, you're good. But during the foster care process, before your parental rights are terminated, you will probably have to do visits.
Right. So. Very good. This was awesome. I really appreciate the story that you all brought to life and the insights you let people hear from you. I know that you went through some challenging things and you're in the middle of some challenging things too, but I just really appreciate that you've let people peek in and hear your story, your beautiful forever family story.
Yes. Thanks so much for having us.
Yes.
As a listener of the Forgotten Adoption Option podcast, you are helping raise awareness about foster care adoption and the 120,000 children who are waiting for a forever family. You can also help raise awareness by leaving a review, subscribing, sharing, talking about, and liking this podcast. If you'd like more information on adopting a child or sibling set through the foster care system, visit my website, ForgottenAdoptionOption.com. There you will find out how to get started, and you can even order a copy of my book, The Forgotten Adoption Option, which will guide you through the entire process, and it is available in paperback, audio, and ebook. I welcome you to reach out with questions, comments, and your own story. I would love to hear if you're signing up for training or where you are in the adoption process. You can connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Just search for Marcy Bursack. Thank you for tuning in, caring, and sharing, because every child deserves a family.